This happened several years ago when I lived with my ex-boyfriend. We had recently moved into a two-bedroom house and set to work turning it into a home. We turned the back bedroom into an office since the house only had one bathroom, and it could only be reached through this bedroom. We would have people crash on our sofa pretty regularly and didn't fancy them having to traipse through our own bedroom to get to the loo in the middle of the night. So we'd been living there for roughly 1 month when this event occurred. My ex was out with work colleagues, and I was home alone. I'd spent the early evening watching TV and eating takeout. A couple of times I heard some strange noises, but whenever I tried to focus on them to figure out what it was, it would stop. It got later, and I decided to go upstairs and use the computer for a little while before heading to bed. At this point in time, we hadn't had our phone line installed, and I was still on a pay-as-you-go phone which had run out of credit. I basically had no way to communicate with anyone while I was in the house that night. So I'm sitting in the back bedroom with only a small table lamp on that barely forms a glow while I'm typing away on my laptop when I heard noises again. It started as a light rattling noise, really faint to the point I had to strain to see if I was really hearing it or imagining it. I shut my music off and tried to figure out what it was. I went into our bedroom and looked down to the front door. Nobody was there. I went back into the back bedroom but couldn't see much out of the window. We had a small yard with a high brick wall and a solid wooden gate with nothing to cast any light. But from what little I could see, there was nothing out back either. I sat back down and switched the music back on. Maybe 10 minutes later, I heard this eerie screeching sound like metal on metal, again very faint, as if whatever was making it was trying desperately to be quiet. I was getting more than a little freaked out by this point, so I went into our bedroom to retrieve this heavy iron rod that we'd found in the back of the built-in wardrobe. I didn't switch on any lights as I didn't know what was going on and didn't want to alert any possible intruder to my location inside the house. Remember, I had no way of calling anyone, and I was getting more than a little concerned someone might actually be in my house. I made my way back into the office and closed the door as quietly as possible before bolting it and lodging a chair under the handle. Nothing more happened for a good 20 minutes or so. I started to feel a little foolish for letting myself get worked up and put it down to it being my first night alone in the house. But I didn't switch the music back on this time, which was lucky because I started to hear a sound like two people whispering, both male voices. They didn't sound like they were coming from inside the house, though. I had the window open ever so slightly, and the sound seemed to be floating in from there. I headed into the bathroom to see if I could get a better look into the alley that the house backed onto. The office and the bathroom formed an L around the yard, with the bathroom extending further out. I climbed up onto the ledge and inched the window open to try and see out into the alley. I couldn't see a thing, but the whispering was louder and coming from directly behind my gate. I couldn't hear whole sentences, but heard enough to surmise whoever these men were. They'd seen us move in, and had seen we had quite a lot of valuable equipment. Guitars, computers, my DSLR, TV, game consoles, etc. I imagined they'd seen I was home alone and had been waiting for me to go to sleep to try and get into the house. I stayed perched there for what felt like an eternity until what seemed like the loudest thud in the world echoed up to me. They'd grown tired of trying to be stealthy, and one or both of them were throwing themselves at my gate, trying to break it down. I could see it shuddering under the blows, and could only imagine how large these men must be. I'm a tiny girl, all of 5'3", and at that point weighed somewhere around 105 pounds. As you can imagine, I was white with terror as I watched my gate groan under the stress. I sat clutching that iron rod, trying to think where I could hide from them. Suddenly, a glaring light blinded me. At first I panicked and dropped out of sight, thinking they were shining a torch at the back of the house. But then I heard barking and shouting. I peeked out again and saw the house across the alley from us had a floodlight installed, illuminating both their own yard, mine, and the alley with light. I heard grumbling and cursing and then 2 sets of footsteps hurrying down the alley. I stayed locked in that office until my ex-boyfriend drunkenly rolled in at about 4 a.m. I didn't sleep a wink that night. When I went into the yard in the morning, my gate was hanging by one hinge, allowing easy access from the alley. When I looked at the back of it, the keyhole was covered in scratches as if someone had tried to force the lock. If they hadn't woken the house behind us, I dread to think what could have happened. This incident took place when I was in 5th grade. It happened during the summertime. My Aunt Gina and her now ex-husband were on one of their many vacation trips. They lived about a 20-minute walk from my old house. Whenever they left for a vacation, they would call on my mom's long-term boyfriend, Gina's brother, to dog sit. She had 3 dogs at the time. My mom and her boyfriend were both professional landscapers. Before he left for work, he'd make a quick drive over to her house to let the dogs out. After work, he'd let them out for an even longer time. I always walked to her house when they were on vacation. It was a beautiful house, I'll tell you that much. I knew the password to the garage, and the door in the garage leading to the house was rarely locked. It didn't need to be anyway. It was a very nice neighborhood. Allow me to explain the layout of the house. It was very big, with many rooms. There was what I always called 2 basements, when in reality it was just one huge basement separated by a door. The entire second floor was their master bedroom and bath. In the living room, there was a sliding door that led to 3 guest rooms and 2 guest bathrooms. The guest room on the farthest right was my favorite. It was huge and open, and had one of the 2 guest bathrooms in it. Of course, the house also had the other essentials: kitchen, dining room, family room, 1/2 bath, and the office room. Each room also had at least 2 openings to it. You were always able to cut that room off from every other in the house. Back to my experience. I did my daily routine of walking over there almost immediately after I woke up. I typed in the code for the garage, let the dogs roam about the house, and went straight for the computer. You could get into the office from 2 ways, the front hall and another hallway on the opposite side. I had closed the door leading to the front hall because I was freaked out by the sliding door that led to the guest rooms. The sliding door was sometimes open just a couple of millimeters, because the dogs would go sniffing around it. If that was the case this day, though I'm unsure. Even though the house was always open, clean, etc., I had always gotten a creepy vibe from it. Maybe it was from past experiences with other things, or maybe I was just paranoid. I decided I was going to go into the basement and watch TV. I brought all 3 dogs with me like I always did. At some point, I had paused the show I was watching so that I could let it pre-buffer, allowing me to skip through the commercials when they came. That's when I heard it. There was no mistaking this sound. The distinct noise of the floorboards above me creaking as if someone was upstairs walking on them. I knew where it was coming from, the living room. It was sounding from right where the seam of the gray-stoned front hall and wooden floor met. I literally couldn't move, couldn't force myself to. I remember just sitting there absolutely petrified. I tried convincing myself that floorboards creak when people aren't walking on them and so on. It wasn't helping. I was sitting, waiting for the next sound, using the best of my ability to hear one little creak from somewhere else. Nothing. I remember wondering if they were in the second basement watching me. You could get down to the second basement a different way if you wanted to. There was a different staircase leading down to it. Somehow, and I don't know how, I got the courage to let the dogs out into the backyard. I went upstairs pretending as if I wasn't scared for my life. I was alone. I was relieved. I was thinking how paranoid I was to think someone was actually in the house. How foolish of me. I let the dogs out through the family room's sliding door. Something compelled me to walk to the front yard. I don't know what it was. I had literally never hung out in the front yard or on the front porch. I went through the backyard gate and walked. I stood alone on the path that led to the front door. I was outside, and I was alone. Someone else was inside, and they were alone too. I saw through my favorite guest room window's blinds, a face looking back at me. I couldn't believe it. I remember my mouth being parted ever so slightly. All I could do was look back. I was a mere couple feet away from the window. He had no expression, just a blank face. I couldn't even tell you what he looked like. Either I don't remember, was too in shock to search out for the details of his face, or maybe my memory wanted me to forget. We looked at each other for what felt like centuries. My heart was going to burst through my chest. We stayed like that for at least 45 seconds. The dogs were still in the backyard. I ran across the street. I started crying, screaming. I was still watching him, and he was watching me. I grabbed my cell phone out of my pocket and called my mom. "There's someone in the house. There's someone in the house. He's been watching me. What do I do? Do I call the police? What do I do?" I don't know why I didn't run to a neighbor's house or call the police first. My mom told me to calm down. She and her boyfriend couldn't leave work, so she sent a family friend over. He was there relatively quickly. He let the dogs in, searched the house, but no one was there. He was alone in the house. Maybe he wasn't, though. Maybe my intruder had just hidden. There were lots of hiding spots in that house. No one believed me. We never told my aunt what happened. Everyone thought, oh, she's young, she was in the house alone, and her mind was playing tricks on her. It wasn't playing tricks on me, and I most certainly wasn't alone in that house. I turned 16 on March 5th. I've retold the story on countless occasions, and still, no one has taken it seriously, and no one has believed me. It was the summer before my freshman year of high school. The year was 1998. My parents and younger brother were out of town, and I was reveling in the freedom of being home alone for an entire day. I had spent most of that time holed up in my upstairs bedroom, watching cable TV while I chatted on the phone with my friends. After a few hours of MTV watching and phone chatting, I decided it was time to relax in a bubble bath and read a Stephen King book, because that was, and still is, my favorite pastime. My bedroom and the bathroom were side by side on the second story of a very large 3-story house that sat on the edge of a small town. My dad was the local pastor of this small town, so we would have random people show up at any hour of the day or night needing food or money, and sometimes they could be very persistent. I was instructed that when home alone, I was not to answer the door. Just stay out of sight until the people would leave, then go on about my day. This strategy had worked for years, so why change it now? On this particular day, all had been quiet. The bathroom was upstairs and out of sight of any doors, and it was the only interior door that locked, so I always felt relatively safe in there. I shut off my TV and hung up the phone and went into the bathroom to run a bubble bath. Once the tub was full, I climbed in and started reading my book. I got about a chapter in when all hell broke loose. I heard the sound of breaking glass coming from the kitchen below me, the room to the left at the foot of the stairs. Also the room with the back door in it, which consisted of a giant double pane of really old glass. My mother was always scolding us for shutting the door too hard. She was convinced we would break it. The sound of breaking glass was followed by a loud voice, a man's voice, a man who was not my father. I got out of the tub as quickly and quietly as possible, grabbed a towel, closed the bathroom door, and slid the lock over. I stood at the door, listening for what felt like an eternity. Then again, from the kitchen, a man's voice, this time quickly followed by a woman's voice that was not my mother. Jesus Christ, 2 goddamn intruders were in my kitchen, and there I stood, butt naked, dripping wet, with nothing but a bath towel to protect me. Now I was really in a full-blown panic. What the fuck was I supposed to do? I looked around the bathroom for weapons, and the best I could come up with was a plastic-handled toilet plunger. Like that's really going to help. At this point, I realized that I hadn't heard anyone for a couple of minutes, so I decided that I was going to sneak to the top of the stairs and listen. Maybe they left after realizing we didn't have many items with street value. Armed with the toilet plunger, I unlocked the bathroom and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. Within seconds, I heard them talking in the kitchen. I decided I needed an evacuation plan and better weapons. I tiptoed back into the bathroom and relocked the door. I knew I didn't have much time until they would come to explore or rob the upstairs, so I needed to hurry. I knew that when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I would be in full view of the kitchen, and the stairs creaked, so they would definitely hear me coming. I also knew that the base of the stairs led to the front door if I made a quick right. So if I could get down and out the door before they realized what was going on, I might be okay. But if they heard me coming, I might have to fight for my life. So I needed a good weapon because it was at least going to be a 2-on-1 fight. I snuck back out of the bathroom and into my bedroom. The whole time I heard them in the kitchen area. The best thing I could come up with in my bedroom was a lighter and a bottle of hairspray. I went back to the top of the stairs and listened again. They were still down there. I counted to 3 and made a run for it, lighter and hairspray at the ready. I reached the landing and turned to glance at the kitchen. That's when everything became glaringly obvious. Sitting in the middle of the kitchen table was my father's pager for the squad. The male EMT was telling the female dispatcher that they had just arrived at the hospital. I let out a big whoosh of air and started hysterically laughing at my stupidity. The door wasn't broken and I was still home alone.